We're gonna do probably the most unlikely Mother's Day message you probably have ever seen. It's full of death and destruction and crazy stuff, but you'll see why in just a second when we do this. So we start right here under a palm tree, and that makes sense. So today we're going to take a look at the story of Deborah, and she called herself right there a mother in Israel. So that's why we're doing this today. There's no other place in the Old Testament or New where someone refers to themselves as a mother in Israel, but she does. And she's really quite notable. We are going to be going back to the wild and woolly book of Judges. If you have never read Judges, you have got to read Judges. It's on the top of my list of the best book of the Bible that would make a great graphic novel, comic book style. This Judges is the comic book of the Old Testament. It's just craziness. So let me give you some background, then we're going to dive into it, and you'll see why we're going to look at Deborah today. The nation of Israel, remember we start with Abraham. Abraham, back in Genesis, Abraham has the promise given to him of life, this new tribe with God. Abraham has a son, Isaac, who has a son, Jacob. Jacob wrestles with God. God changes his name to Israel. That's what Israel means, wrestles with God. And then Jacob/Israel, he has 12 sons who become the 12 tribes of Israel. And in the lifetime of those 12 sons, there's a famine, and so they go off down to Egypt so they can all eat. And the family's down in Egypt for 4 stinking centuries. It starts out pretty good. They welcome them and they feed them. And then time goes on and the Egyptians say, hey, we can enslave these people. So they enslave the Israelites and they're there for over 4 centuries. Finally, God brings up Moses and says, Moses, you need to get my people free. And Moses brings them free. Actually, God does it through Moses. And then Moses dies before they get in the promised land. And Joshua comes in as the military commander and he brings them into the promised land. Now they're finally in the promised land after wandering the desert for another generation. They're in the promised land and Joshua dies. That's the beginning of Judges. This is a period where there is no Abraham. There is no Isaac, Jacob, Israel. There are no sons of Israel. There is no Moses. There is no Joshua. The nation basically is without any leadership. And that's the wild and woolly story of the 21 chapters of Judges. It's where there really is no established leadership. And there's another interesting thing going on during Judges. God decides that when Joshua comes in and militarily pushes out the bad people out of the promised land, God won't let him push out all of the bad people. And when I say bad people, I say people who worship notoriously bad gods like Baal, and other gods. God doesn't allow Joshua to push them all out. And the reason he gives them the beginning of Judges is so the nation of Israel will be tested all the time about whether they're going to follow the true and one and only God or if they're going to be influenced by these native gods that were left behind. And so all the way through the book of Judges, you have cycles, over a dozen cycles, where the people of Israel are doing good and they're following God, and they forget, and suddenly they start following the Baals of the people that are left there, and they get oppressed, and then God delivers them, and this cycle goes 12 times, about 12 or 13, maybe 14 times in Judges. It has no coincidence at all. It's just over a dozen of these cycles. They go in and they fall prey to the Canaanite gods and all, the Hittite gods and the Jebusite gods and all that kind of, which is why God said, push all those guys out, but we're going to leave a few behind. So that as generations go on, you'll be tested about who you're going to follow. Who are you going to follow? Okay? And that's where we are in Deborah. We're in one of these cycles. So let's just dive right in, and we'll see what's going on. So scene 1, here we go. I call this Chariots of Wrath. And we begin the story in Judges 4, verse 1. Then the sons of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud had died. And by the way, this is the cycle right here. What happens is, if you look at the top of the cycle, Israel disobeys God. Israel is oppressed because God removes his protection from Israel and nasty people start oppressing them. And they oppress them for quite some time, usually on the measure of decades. And then Israel cries out, see there on the right, and then God raises up a deliverer at the bottom of the screen. And then Israel is delivered through this one deliverer. Israel is at peace for a while, again for decades. And then they forget about God and they disobey. And they go around this cycle over a dozen times in Judges is what happens. So right here, we're at this top one. Israel, that's your life. I know. Judges is meant to be a picture of your life, actually. It is. So here we are, verse 1 of chapter 4. And they did evil in the sight of the Lord. So we're at the top of the cycle. Israel disobeys. Then you go to verse 2. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan. Sold is actually like a slave term. Sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan. Boo, bad guy. who reigned in Hatzor. By the way, if you ever go to Israel, go to Hatzor. It's still a cool place. And the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. That's a lot of stuff, and I'll explain it in just a second. But before we do, I want you to look at verse 1. See that Ehud guy? Ehud actually happens in the previous chapter, chapter 3. You got to read about Ehud because he kills this nasty, oppressive king by the name of Eglon, who is the prototype of Jabba the Hutt. I am not kidding you. So go back to chapter 3 if you want, again, some graphic novel. It's a crazy thing. But Ehud, the good guy, kills Eglon, the Jabba the Hutt of the Old Testament. Anyway, okay, so verse 2, Jabin, the king of Canaan, he's oppressing Israelites. He reigns in Hatzor, and the commander of his army, his general, is Sisera. So here we go. We go from Israel disobeying to now Israel is oppressed because God removes protection from Israel because they're disobeying him. So remember, as we looked through Galatians, we said the primary contract is, if you'll be my people, I'll be your God. And what happens is Israel says, we're not going to be your people today. And God says, well, then I won't be your God. And he removes the protection. So let's take a look and see what's going on. Verse 3. So the sons of Israel cried to the Lord, for he had 900 iron chariots. And he oppressed the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. So you again move from the oppressed to Israel cries out, because it's been a long time, it's been 20 years that this has been going on. Yeah. Oh, this one? Okay. So the oppression's been going on for 20 years. Now, for 20 years, they're in the promised land, but this Jabin, who's a king of the Canaanites, is oppressing them, and he's oppressing them with the most powerful military weapon of the entire area. Chariots. Big deal. Chariots were like the tanks of olden time versus the foot soldiers. And there's another complication here, is that during this time, Israel's not making their own iron. So they don't have swords. Okay, they don't have swords. Basically, what they have is sticks. It's whatever they can make out of wood. Oh, go back to the previous, if you go back to the end of the previous chapter, chapter 3, there's this guy named Shamgar, who actually kills 600 Philistines with an ox goad, which is just a stick that you steer the front of oxes with while they're plowing. He uses a stick and he kills 600 Philistines. How's the rest of that story go? We don't know. That's all we know. But anyway, that's just right before this. What's that? Big stick. Yeah. So anyway, so that's where we're at right there. 900 iron chariots. Now, to be clear, an iron chariot only works really well when it's on flat ground. It's not a hill climbing machine, right? So it turns out that military is a significant part of this story right here. They can control the entire flat part of Israel and hence oppress everyone. Usually, as you see right here, usually there's two guys in the chariot. There's usually the driver, which is the guy on the right who has the shield. And then there's either a guy with a sword or a lance or a bow. And these guys prefer the bow. So basically, you could cut through a flat area where there'd be thousands of foot soldiers, and as this thing just careened through the foot soldiers, the archer could go through and just pick people off as they go through one at a time, or a guy with a long sword could just lop off people's heads as he goes. It was really quite, and there's nothing you could do about it, really. You had to get lucky as a foot archer to take one of these guys down. Plus, we think that these guys had a special kind of attachment to their chariots, and here's a picture of one right here. You see right down here? What's that hanging off the axle? Coming off the axle of that chariot is a long scythe, they call it. It's a sharpened blade. So there's one in the front, and in this case, this guy's a two-wheeled chariot. There's two on the side. So even if you were a foot soldier and you wanted to get close to the guys in the chariots, you can only get as close as the length of those scythes, or they'll cut you in half. It's a very nasty war machine, is what we're talking about. So when it says back in that verse that they oppressed the Israelites for 20 years with these 900 chariots, you can kind of see why. So let's get the graphical picture. This is important. Here's Israel. Those names are the tribes of Israel. They kind of went to different areas of Israel, and you'll recognize a bunch of those names. So here's where they are. Up here is Hatzor, where the evil King Jabin is. He's up around there. Over here is where his general, Sisera, is at Harosheth Hagoyim. Kind of separated. And it's funny they should be in two different places, but we'll see why in a second. The reason is because this area in green is the only flat places in Israel, pretty much. It's a flat plain that connects the Mediterranean from present-day Haifa in Israel all the way into the Jordan River Valley right there. And it's the flat place. North of that, it's all hilly. South of that, it's all hilly. So if these excuse me, if these chariots are going to really play well, they're only going to play well in that green area. But that green area is spectacularly flat. Spectacularly flat. Plus, anyone who was coming from the Mediterranean and going south down to the river Jordan Valley would go through this area here. It was a huge traffic and commerce area because it was flat. You didn't have to climb any mountains. So they, with these 900 chariots, could actually control all the traffic in and out of this area right here and really literally cut Israel in half from the north and the south by having these chariots there. And the guys in the north, that is the tribes of Asher and Naphtali and Zebulun and Issachar, those guys were severely oppressed by these guys because they couldn't be connected to their friends, their neighbors in the south. So they commanded this. By the way, this green area is also known by a very famous title. It's the Valley of Armageddon. Yes. Megiddo, as a town, is right there. And so this is the valley, Har Megiddo. It's the valley where classically battles have been fought forever because it's flat. Because it's flat. And in the end, in Revelation, the big battle that's going to happen is going to be in that same juncture right there, which coincidentally is a great place for tanks to operate too, because it's flat. So that's just a little background for that. I decided to go on Google Earth, and I hovered over that spot right there and looked out toward the Mediterranean, toward Haifa, which is actually right here in this thing right here. And I took a picture, and this is the picture that I got when I went on Google Earth. There's the Mediterranean up there. Here's the mountainous stuff that rises up to the south. There's mountainous stuff that goes here. But what caught my eye was this right here. Can you read this? If I blow it up, it says Kiryat Harosheth. It's still there. To this very day, you can go on Google Earth and zoom in on that spot, and it says Harosheth. The Harosheth Hagoyim. By the way, the last part, Hagoyim, if you have any Jewish friends, they call non-Jews Goyim. Just means the nations. So Harosheth Hagoyim is Harosheth of the nations. But sure enough, you go on Google Earth, you zoom into this little pinch point in the valley here, and it's still called Harosheth. The story we're reading right now is more than 1,500 years before Christ. And now it's still called Harosheth. Blows my mind. Anyway, yeah.
Now, Harosheth has a new name now?
Kiryat Harosheth. Kiryat just means village of. Yeah.
Does it have a new name?
It's this.
This?
That's it, yeah. But they still retain the word Harosheth. So as you look up toward the west, toward the Mediterranean up there, you see how this is a very flat valley that extends up there. And the flat valley goes underneath us and curves to the right. And this is the entire area, starting right here at this pinch point. This pinch point is where those chariots were garrisoned, 900 chariots. And from there, they could go out toward the Mediterranean, or they could go inland and completely control the ground because it was flat. Flat. They controlled all commerce in the area. Okay, let's go to scene 2. A mother in Israel. So we go to verse 4 of chapter 4. Now Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at the time. What do you mean judging Israel? Well, in terms of a lay person who is offering justice decisions for people who have civil disputes. They had to go to somebody. There was no king. There was no other hierarchy or architecture of people in the country. So what happened during this time is that God would raise up godly people like Deborah and say, will you voluntarily settle these civil disputes? Bring justice. Be a judge. And so that's what she was doing. She was sitting actually under a tree. Verse 5, she used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the sons of Israel came up to her for judgment. Now that's, if you're saying, that doesn't look like a palm tree to me, that's because it's not. But in Israel, you'll find palm trees or acacia trees, this is what this is. If it's a dry area, it'll be an acacia. But the idea is, it was shade. So Deborah was raised up by God because she listened to God, she had the wisdom of God, and she would sit out there in the public open, and people would come to her asking for decisions when they'd have civil disputes. And that's what she did. That's what she did. She offered her wisdom, and that's what they would do. So where is she? Well, she's actually in this map down here. Hill country of Ephraim right there. That's where Deborah's palm tree is. So you got the geography all set. The people in the north, Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, are being oppressed by Hatzor from the evil king Jabin, and his general, who's got the 900 chariots in that big flat plain. It's also called the Jezreel Valley, as well as Armageddon and all that kind of stuff. But they're being oppressed in the north, and Deborah's in the south. And so the story unfolds a little bit more. Verse 6. Now she sent and summoned Barak, the son of Abinoam from Kedesh Naphtali, and she said to him, now get this is astonishing. She says to this guy, who's actually a general for Israel, behold, the Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, go and march to Mount Tabor and take with you 10,000 men from these tribes, the sons of Naphtali, the sons of Zebulun, and I will draw out to you Sisera, remember the commander of the chariots, the commander of Jabin's army, and his chariots and his many troops to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand. So let me just show you on a map. Okay, here we are on the map again. We need to do a close-up of the top up here because this is where this is all going to happen. The action's in the north. So here's a blow-up of that, okay? So what's going to happen? Well, Deborah says that God has commanded, and what God has commanded is this. Here's Kedesh in the north, which we're going to go to, and here's where Mount Tabor is in the south. Now, Mount Tabor, along with another mountain, are prominent stick-up kind of little mountains right in the middle of that flat valley. There's nothing else in that flat valley except a couple of these hills. So what she's saying is God has commanded that Barak needs to go up to Naphtali and to Zebulun, the people whose lives are being so disrupted, gather an army of 10,000 people, and that 10,000 people army will march and go up on the top of Mount Tabor in the middle of this flat valley. Now, if you have a military background, does that disturb you at all? Because it's actually military suicide. Because the chariots are not far away. If you take 10,000 men, put them on top of this, it looks more like a knoll from our perspective, and the chariot guys find out about you, they can just hustle their way down that valley, and they can completely surround the base of your hill and basically starve you out. It's a siege. You can't get in or out. It's actually military suicide to do this. And so here's Deborah, a mother in Israel, telling Barak, who happens to be a general in Israel, get 10,000 people from the most oppressed people, gather them together, and go march up to the top of Mount Tabor, and then Sisera will bring his chariots to you, and God will give them to you. What? So you know what Barak's response is? This is just laughable. This is why I love this book. They're going to come there and meet right there. So anyway, Barak says to her, well, if you go with me, then I'll go. But if you won't go with me, I won't go. Well, I make fun of Barak, but that's actually a rational thing. It's like, okay, Deborah, mother of Israel, who doesn't know anything about military stuff, if you go up there, I'll go too. And I think he didn't think she was going to say okay. I think he's hoping she says, oh, well, just kidding. I don't think it's a great idea. So he says this, and then her response in verse 9 is, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the honor shall not be yours on the journey that you're about to take, for the Lord will sell Sisera, the commander of the chariots, he'll sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. So, here's the deal. I will go with you, but because you're acting like such a wuss, God's going to give the honor of the victory to a woman. Very, very, ouch. It's a big ouch. Now, at this point in the story, you would think that the woman she's talking about is herself. But it's not. It's another woman still. Really? See, it gets really cool. So anyway, here's what's going to go on. So Deborah rose and went with Barak to Kedesh, up there in the top, through Zebulun and Naphtali. And Barak called Zebulun and Naphtali together to Kedesh, and 10,000 men went up with him, and Deborah also went with him. When it says he went up with him, it means that they actually went up the mountain at Tabor. So they collected the troops, and they go and they sit on the top of this little hill, and they wait for the chariots to come. It's crazy. And if you don't catch how crazy this is, it's crazy, okay? So let's go to scene 3. Just as you're anticipating a great slaughter, we change scenes. And this is called Where's Heber? And I'm not talking about Heber City. I'm talking about another Heber, okay? Scene 3. Verse 11, now Heber, the Kenite, it's a guy, had separated himself from the Kenites, from the sons of Hobab, the father-in-law of Moses, and he had pitched his tent as far away as the oak of Zaananim, which is near Kedesh. Now, Now, a little background. The Kenites live way to the south in Israel. In fact, further south than I could fit on the picture, unfortunately. They're very far. They're arid, kind of Arab sorts and that kind of stuff. Way far to the south. The Kenites actually are descendants of Hobab, who was Moses' father-in-law. It's his wife's dad is who it is. So the Kenites are way down there. But he does a funny thing. What he does is he relocates way up here to Kadesh. Why? Because we need it for the story. So he separates, and there's a solitary tent and family up in Kadesh who happen to be Kenites from the very, very far south. Now, one more piece of background you need, because he's setting up the story with this, is this. Years later, when Saul is the first king of Israel, Saul is getting ready to take out the Amalekites, but they're mixed with the Kenites. So Saul says, depart, go down from among the Amalekites, so that I do not destroy you with them. For you showed kindness to all the sons of Israel when they came up from Egypt. Talking to the Kenites. So Saul doesn't want to kill the Kenites along with the Amalekites, so he gives them warning and says, separate from the Amalekites because I'm going to destroy them. The Kenites have been long-term friends of Israel, but they're not Israelites, but long-term friends, all the way back to when Moses led them out of Egypt. So we're talking many centuries back. They've been good friends, but they're still not Israelites. So just keep that in your hip pocket. You'll need that in a second. Okay, we go to scene 4. Chariots versus sticks. Remember, Israel's got sticks, and these guys have iron chariots. So here we go. It starts to go down. Verse 12, then they told Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, at which point he probably started laughing hilariously. And Sisera called together all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the people who were with him from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. So he leaves from right here and he ventures out toward where they are all holed up at the top of this little hill, and it's going to be a bloodbath, he's thinking. His chariots have full reign over this green area. There's no way these guys are going to get out. They're trapped. It's going to be the best victory of all victories, is what Sisera is thinking when he goes out that way. Well, I went to Google Earth and did some more looking. Here is Mount Tabor today. See, it really exists. There's no dispute about where it is. That's it right there. And we are looking toward the west. See that flat area to the left that extends? That's that flat plain that the chariots deal so well with. Now, this hill is small. You can actually see the size of the houses right here. 900 chariots could almost touch each other and ring the bottom of this hill. These guys are gone. In fact, without even lifting a finger, they could just starve them out up there, basically, until they all die. Yeah, that's what they could do. So anyway, I went a bit closer. We're going to fly a bit closer so we can get a better look at the plain. There's the plain off to the beyond there. That's toward the west, where they're going to be coming from. And as we fly closer, this is real. This is taken from space just a couple years ago. This is a real place. And then if you look off on the horizon, that's where the chariots are going to come. And you, with 10,000 troops, get to sit up there and watch this war machine come at you in slow motion. It's suicide for the Israelites. Absolute suicide. But according to Deborah, a mother in Israel, if you put 10,000 troops on this hill and draw these guys out to you, God will give them into your hands. What? Oh, the story gets better. So Deborah says to Barak as she looks out there, she's on top of the mountain with him, arise, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Behold, the Lord has gone out before you. So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. She sees something, and so does he, that they say, we need to leave the mountain and go down, and they're ours. The story goes on. Then the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak, and Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. It was so bad, the slaughter of Sisera's troops, that Sisera himself, the general of the chariots, got out of his chariot and ran away. And we know from the story that's coming up for a second here, he ran to the north. He just leaves the entire battlefield. It's gone. But it says the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots. 900 chariots fell, and his entire army, and everyone by the edge of the sword before Barak. They're all dead. They're all dead. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, so they go back up the valley and toward the coast. And all of the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not even one was left. And so if you're a good Bible student, you're saying, What happened? This doesn't make any sense. These guys ruled this valley for 20 years with these chariots, 900 of them. And now we go up on a mountain. They come at you like they're going to kill you. He comes down the mountain and he kills them all. We're missing a piece of the story. And they all lived happily ever after the end. Not. Okay, we're going to keep going. But before we keep going on the story, I want to make a couple points about Deborah, and this is really what's important. The question is what happened up there? And we're going to find that out in just a second, what happened up there and why that happened. If you go to Judges 5, you find the answer to what happened up there. Judges 4, which we're looking at today, is the narrative of the actual battle. Judges 5, which I'm not going to read for all of it today to you, so I recommend you go home and read it, is a song that commemorated the entire day. It commemorated everything about Deborah and Barak. It was probably written several decades later. But it's the Song of Deborah and Barak is what it's called. And as you read through this song, and you look at the lyrics of the song, which we don't have the tune for anymore, but if you look through the lyrics of the song, you get some clues. And here's some of the clues in the song. If you go to verse 21 in Judges 5, she writes in her song, the torrent of Kishon, that's the name of the river that dominates that plain, the torrent of Kishon swept them away. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. Oh, my soul, march on with strength. And then the horse's hoofs beat from the dashing of his valiant steeds. So what happened? Well, chariots run good on flat ground, but flat, mushy ground? No. So what happened was that a storm came up, and the Kishon River, which is really almost like a creek that goes through this flat plain, swelled so much because it's so flat, it overwhelmed its banks, it flooded the entire area, and this entire flat highway for chariots became goop for chariots. They launched out from Harosheth Hagoyim, they turned the corner, started coming toward Tabor where the river is, and in their excitement, they're going, and all of a sudden, and they bogged down. Now that last line about the horses. The chariots got bogged down under the weight of 2 men, sometimes 3, inside an iron chariot, heavy. Iron chariot on thin little iron wheels, slices in like knives. The things totally bottom out in the mud. And the horses, as they're being whipped by the driver, go, go, go. The horses are stomping their feet and trying to get out. And what you hear is that last line right there. The horse's hoof beat. If you have a King James Version, it says the horse's hooves broke. Because the word that's used is when you beat something like a coconut until it breaks, right? Either their hooves broke or they just beat. But the horses are absolutely frantic to pull these chariots out of the muck. And all you can hear is the dashing of these hooves, of these valiant steeds trying to get out of the muck, and they can't get out of the muck. Now, if you're a driver, you have one of 2 choices. You're a driver, you get stuck right there. You can either get out of your chariot and try to lift these things out, but they're iron. Not going to happen, right? You can call AAA. Not going to happen. They're not there. And we're talking, you can't even talk to your fellow army guys because they're all stuck. 900 chariots, stuck in the mud. So what do? You keep whipping the horses. It's the only thing you can do. They're your only engine to be able to get you out of the muck. Now, as you're trying to get the horses to pull you out of the muck, you look over your windshield and you see 10,000 men coming down from Mount Tabor. Now what do? You whip even harder. And you whip really hard. And the guys from Barak's army come down to Mount Tabor. They come across the valley. Of course, they can navigate okay. And they come and they kill these guys while they're actually in their chariots. Because it seems safer to stay in your chariot whipping your horse, trying to get out, and they're just sitting ducks. The only one who has enough sense is the general. He gets out, Sisera gets out of his chariot and runs on foot and escapes. He's the only smart one that's there. And he runs off foot and just leaves. And then the story tells us that everybody else in the entire army dies. Now, how did Deborah know God was going to bring a spring storm and swell it and make it all mucky? She didn't. She just knew that God commanded, go tell Barak to take 10,000 troops, go on the top of Mount Tabor, and those guys will come out to you in their chariots, and God will give them into your hand. That's all she knew. She's not a military tactician. which is good. Because if she proposed this plan to Barak as a military tactician, she'd say, okay, I know this sounds stupid. But she didn't even know it sounded stupid. Yeah. Still to come. Hold that thought. Who's the woman going to be delivered to? Oh, there's more in this story. But I want us to stop right here before we finish the story. So here's the deal. They get completely swamped and bottomed out, and they just can't get out. And they're sitting ducks, and Israel comes, and they kill them all. Kill them all. 20 years of oppression under these chariots is snuffed out in a day. In a day. And as far as we know, the only guys left are Sisera the general and Jabin the king, who lives up in Hatzor, about another 50 miles to the north. That's what happened that day. So let me just summarize Deborah, because why are we even looking at this? Deborah was a judge, which means that she had continually demonstrated the wisdom of God when she would judge civil disputes in Israel. She clearly, almost like Solomon, had this wisdom to deal with these disputes, that she was highly respected in the nation. And the only way she could get that wisdom is if she was hearing it from God. Now remember, the whole chapter starts out with her being a prophetess. Remember that? Well, that just means she had a special connection with God, and when God spoke, she heard him. So she used that to be able to, on the behalf and the benefit of the nation of Israel, be a very just judge who would sit under a palm tree and say, you got any problems? Bring them to me. And with God's wisdom and my connection to him, we'll let God decide these issues. So she clearly had a track record of being able to decide issues with her connection with God. That's her great value, is this connection she's got with God. And it's been highly respected out under the palm tree of Deborah for years, probably decades. And probably after her kids had grown and left home, I might add. Because if you got little kids at home, you're not going to be going out sitting under the palm tree all day. We know she's married, so they probably are kids. We don't know if they were or not, but that's the whole deal. So here's this very wise, probably older woman sitting out there demonstrating the wisdom of God and demonstrating her connection to God and settling issues for the benefit of the people that came to her. And they respected her for that. That's an incredible thing. Also, she's a messenger. She passes on instructions from God. And that's exactly what she did with Barak, because remember when she contacts Barak up in the north, she says, a command has come from God. A command. Now, it's actually not a command to her, it's a command to Barak, but she's the one who brings the message, right? And she says to him, God has commanded, take him up on the hill, bad guys and chariots will come out, and they'll give him into your hands. So, based on the fact of number one on this list, her track record as being a wise, just person who actually exhibits the heart of God, based on that track record, she can come to Barak and say the most outrageous thing and say, this is what God says. And he'll say, if you come with me. And he accepts it. That's a very important thing to get to realize here. And then finally, third, I'll say she's a leader. Because not only did she pass on the message and she brought great wisdom, she walked the talk by trusting God. She didn't say, Barak, here's the command from God. Good luck with that. Because, I got to go back to the palm tree. She decides to put herself in harm. Now, women don't go into battle. Not only because they're not very effective from a strength position, but if they're ever taken captive, the consequences are horrible. Here's this older woman, wise in her age, and she goes to the top of the mountain with all these other soldiers that have nothing but sticks to defend themselves. And she puts herself in danger. Because, why? Because of 1 and 2. Because she's used to hearing the words of God, using them to bring benefit to the people around her and love them with the justice she brings, and she's used to bringing those messages to people. She's got all confidence in what God has ever said. So get this clear. Deborah is not a hero in the Old Testament because she's a military giant. She's a hero in the Old Testament because she can hear God. Because she can hear God. She hears God. She tells people what she hears for their benefit, and she walks in the very things she hears from him. Her strength is her relationship with God. So when she writes the song in Judges 5, what does she call herself? A wise military commander with great insight and strategic planning skills? She says, I'm Deborah, I'm mother in Israel. And we'll look at that in just a second. Right there. Judges 5, 6, and 7. In her song, she says, The highways were deserted. You couldn't even travel in the open. And travelers went by roundabout ways because of these chariot guys. The peasantry ceased. That's the rural people. They couldn't even act rural open anymore. The peasantry ceased. They ceased in Israel until I, Deborah, arose, until I arose, a mother in Israel. So, you mothers who think you have no impact on your society, you have a gigantic impact primarily through shaping the whole next generation. That's just gigantic. But someday, even after you do that, God might say, you hear me so well, will you engage on behalf of the people around you? And for Deborah, it might have only been once, this one time right here. But then again, even still, you are not going to go down in the history books as being a military giant. You go down as being a mother in Israel. Here's this powerful general Barak who can walk into these two tribes up in the north. He can gather together 10,000 troops armed with sticks. He has this military influence to do that. And yet, nothing happened until a woman who had a connection listening to God in a humble way, God speaks to her because no one else is listening. You have a tremendous impact on the next generation and the present one to the extent that you're following God. And in Deborah's case, it can have gigantic repercussions. Gigantic. So I get really mad when I hear a woman introduce herself after her husband tells his career, and she says, well, I'm just a mother. And I think Deborah. And I go, yeah. Follow God. Listen to his voice. Understand what he's saying. Use that connection for the benefit and the wisdom of the people around you. Yeah. Raise up a next generation of leaders who understand how to follow God. Yeah. Influence the people around you. Stand up and say, I've heard God speak and we need to move. That's a mother in Israel. That's what mothers. That's the mothers in the Old Testament and the New. It's really quite radical when you think about it. At the time, women had in the ancient cultures about as much value as cattle, maybe less. And here's a woman, because she listens to God, changes a whole generation of people. See, if you were going to write the Bible as though you were writing a graphic novel, I wouldn't put a woman in this position in the story. But God's trying to make a point. Deborah didn't free Israel. Barak didn't free Israel. God freed Israel. And make no mistake about it. Why? Because Deborah, a mother in Israel, was the beginning of the story. God uses the weak things to confound the wise. And he does it over and over and over. The key for us is listening to him and following him and letting him lead us. And then for the benefit and love of those around us, use that for their good. When I hear Deborah, I go, woo! A mother in Israel. Okay, we need to finish the story. Scene 5. If tent pegs are outlawed, you know how the rest of that goes? Yeah, that's right. If tent pegs are outlawed, then only outlaws will use tent pegs. It's a line we usually use for handguns. And you'll see why in a second. So here we go. Back to the picture right here, 17. Now Sisera, remember, the general, he fled. He's out loose. Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, or Yael, if you say it right, the wife of Heber. Remember Heber? Yeah, remember Heber? She goes to Heber, the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hatzor, and the house of Heber, the Kenite. So he leaves the battleground down here after it's all finished and runs, likely this path right here, all the way up to Kedesh. And he thinks, maybe I'm safe up there. After all, he's on the other side of his king Jabin, so maybe it's safe up there. And by the way, he spots a tent, which clearly looks like it comes from the tribe of the Kenites. So he goes in there thinking, well, there's a peace treaty between Heber, the Kenites, and us, Jabin, the king of Hatzor. Oh, it's a safe place. So that's where he runs to find refuge. Now, Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my master, turn aside to me. Don't be afraid. And he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. Now, see, he's run a long way, so he's very tired. He's very tired. And he said to her, this is a creepy picture. He says to her, I just had to find a creepy picture, so there she is. So he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. And so she opened a bottle of milk, gave him a drink, and then she covered him. By the way, that sounds very motherly to me. Can I have something to drink? Yes, here's some milk. Thank you, and covers him up. It's not going to end well, just in case you wondered. Okay, and she covers him. And he said to her, okay, stand in the doorway of the tent, and it shall be if anyone comes and inquires of you and says, is there anyone there? You should say, no. And then he drifts off into dreamland. Don't fall asleep. 21. But Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg, seized a hammer in her hand, and went secretly to him and drove the peg into his temple, and it went through into the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted. So he died. Just in case you missed how serious this was. So he died. I'd let you know. More of this story. Don't give orders to women when you're falling asleep. Yeah. So yeah, she evidently this tent peg, she's one of the people who puts up the tents, so she knows where the tent pegs are and she knows how to use a hammer. I've got a tent peg and a hammer and I know how to use them. And Sisera falls asleep just absolutely dead tired, dead. And there he goes. 22. And behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Jael came out to meet him and said to him, I love this picture. She's pretty proud. And came and said to him, come, and I'll show you the man you're seeking. Isn't this great? Mr. General, he's in here. He's in here. Well, he entered with her, and behold, Sisera was lying dead with a tent peg in his temple. So there's no dialogue from Barak right here. He doesn't have to ask, hey, what happened to him? He sees him, and he's got a tent peg in his temple, and we know the tent peg goes all the way through his head into the ground. I mean, it's like, that looks fatal. So he doesn't say anything. There he is. Not much to say. Scene 6. This is the epilogue right here. Jabin the king of he's still alive up there in the north. 23. So God subdued on that day Jabin the king of Canaan before the sons of Israel. So before you start getting any kind of hero worship about Deborah or Barak or even Jael, God's the one that did all this. That's very important in all this. God did all of this. 24. So the hand of the sons of Israel pressed heavier and heavier upon Jabin the king of Canaan until they destroyed Jabin the king of Canaan. Against all odds, this should never have happened. This happens. I'm going to go back one right here. I'll get back to that in a second. So I just want to make a final thing before we wrap it up. The interesting thing is, if you go on the internet and you search for artwork of Deborah and artwork of Jael, guess which one has much more artwork? Jael, by a ton. I mean, you type in Jael picture and you'll just be overwhelmed with pictures of her with, there's a really nice like 15th century painting that's been done, and she's in this wonderful kind of pleasant pictures, of women at the time, and she's got this little brass hammer and this little, that's not it. So, but anyway, it illustrates an interesting thing. In this story with Deborah and Jael, even though God's the one who really did all of this, really, he orchestrated the entire thing, we are more prone to give the honor to Jael. Because after all, here's a woman killing a general with a tent peg and a hammer. That's just cool. I can make a movie about this. But Jael's not really the story. Deborah's the story. And what did Deborah do right? No tent pegs, no hammers. She listened to God. And that changed a whole generation. And it stuck for decades. Jael's kind of a side story, but we get all excited about Jael, make pictures and all that kind of stuff. Also, it's interesting that Jael, being a Kenite, she's not even an Israelite in that sense. She really shouldn't have any honor in the story. But she does fulfill what the prophetess Deborah had said to Barak. Remember what she said? Because of what you're doing here, you're not going to be honored for this day. The honor will go to a woman. Who is that? Jael. She's not even an Israelite. So God's going to free the Israelites, and the person getting credit is not going to be a man, and it's not even going to be an Israelite. It's going to be a Kenite woman who no one knows named Jael. So why? So God will get the credit. I mean, the irony is thick in this entire thing. You can't write a better story than this. This is just awesome. So I'll just put one last comment. So when we read the story of Deborah, just make sure when you honor who's to be honored in this, it's not Jael, it's not even Deborah, it's God. Now, in the entire cycles, the over a dozen cycles in Judges where all this goes up and down, the roller coaster of obeying God and disobeying God and the oppression and then someone raised, as you go through all of those cycles over and over and over again, the message is this: not that God raises up heroes, but that when you cry out to God in his love, he responds. And they did stupid stuff. They followed the Baals. They did a whole bunch of crazy, stupid stuff. And God let them go into oppression from these horrible, pagan, oppressive military regimes. And when they cry out to God, God in his loving kindness says, okay, we'll fix this. And he raises up a nobody out of nowhere to do what he's going to do in their midst. They don't get the credit in it. God does. Over and over. And the message and the what's the moral of the story for all of Judges, including Deborah's story? Follow the Lord and he'll protect you. If you'll be his people, he'll be your God. He'll protect you from these people. But the minute you stop being his people, he's going to withdraw his protection and say, well, you don't want me? Great. You want them? Go for it. Get back to me and tell me how it turns out. And every time it turns out badly. Every single time. In fact, if you're intrigued to read more about Judges, keep reading after chapter 5, and in chapter 6, you get one of the most famous guys of the book of Judges, Gideon. But I'm the least person in my father's house, which is the least household of all of Israel. And what do you mean, Mr. Angel, calling me a great warrior? Huh? And even after things turn out good with Gideon, spoiler alert, things turn out good with Gideon. Even after things turn out good with Gideon, the people say to Gideon, we want you to be in charge of everything. We want you to be king. We want you, Gideon, to rule over us. And you know what Gideon says? I bless his heart. He says, no, it's not for me to rule over you. It's for God to rule over you. I like Gideon too. So the entire book of Judges is all about a God who will intercede on our behalf when we'll give our heart to him and say, we're yours. But the minute we say, I'd rather do my own thing for a while, God, like a great gentleman he is, steps back and says, okay, tell me how it works out for you. It always turns out bad. You've got Deborah. You've got Ehud before him and Jabba the Hutt, Eglon. You've got Gideon after him. You've got Samson that comes up later. All of these people that God raises up from nowhere so that the credit and the glory go to God and not to the people involved. But God will use the most ordinary people to do the most extraordinary thing. Gideon puts together an army of 30,000 people. And God says, too much. And he says explicitly why. Why? Well, because after the story turns out well, they might think it was because you had so many people. We need to make that message more obvious. We need to thin this down. In the end, he engages the Midianites with 300 people against tens of thousands. And God wins, not the 300. You got to love Judges. If you haven't read Judges, this is your day to do it. You can keep reading on. But if nothing else, read chapter 5 and read the song that Deborah and Barak write about this. And it's full of irony and it's full of glory to God. And it's full of saying, Deborah in the first person, everything was all screwed up until I, Deborah, a mother in Israel, arose. Yeah, Sheila. I flipped over to Gideon's story. That was 300 people. Sorry. I was getting too excited about Judges. And it's just, yeah. So anyways, one last thing. This picture right here. This is today Mount Tabor. If you go to Israel, that's Mount Tabor. It sticks out like a sore thumb in a flat plain. There's two little knolls like this next to each other. This is Tabor, and right next to the left, you can't see it, is Mount Moreh. But this little knoll right here, this mountain, has a very important role over 1,000 years later in the New Testament. And if you want to find out about it, read it right here, okay? So now you have your reading assignments. Matthew 17:1. Very important role during the time of Jesus. Whew. Let's pray. Father, what you do in our midst when we put our trust in you without question, when we let you provide and protect for us. And Lord, if nothing else in Judges, you have taught me that to deny you and to walk away from you, from the one who loves us with a power and protection unparalleled by anyone else. When we walk away from you, whose desire is nothing but to give us great, deep, and abundant life. When we walk away from you and we prefer other false gods and other things that we think that can bring life, just like in Judges, all those things fail. They're just lying. There is no one like you. Lord, who do we have in heaven but you? And you wait to engage in our behalf for our best. And yet we so easily leave you and walk away. And Lord, here on this Mother's Day as well, thank you for the encouragement of this message, that you don't wait to have highly qualified people to engage for what you have planned. You wait for us ordinary folks. And even for those whose primary task is raising a family and changing the next generation. But then you also use us in this generation as we listen to you. So, Lord, I pray that you'd keep our ears open to you, that you'd keep us easily steered by you, and that not only in the results for our children, but in the results for the current culture you put us, that you would powerfully speak through us and to us, that we might be a benefit both in wisdom and message and righteousness for those that are around us, only because we hear you. So thank you for this great story, and we thank you for your nearness and your loving kindness and the power of your love engaged in our behalf. And we thank you for our moms who showed a lot of who you are because of that. So thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.